What would you do if, during a routine ultrasound, you discovered your perfect billionaire husband was planning to leave you and take everything? Imagine being 7 months pregnant, only to overhear a phone call that shatters your world, a secret will, a mistress plotting in the shadows, and a multi-million-dollar betrayal that could cost you your family, your fortune, and your sanity. But this story isn't about defeat. It's about a woman who fights back harder than anyone expects. What secrets would you uncover if you dug into the person you trusted most? How far would you go to protect your children and yourself when the odds are stacked against you? Stay with me till the end, because you won't believe how far this story goes. Courtroom drama, shocking twists, and a final act of courage that changes everything. If this story grips you like it did me, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts or share your own stories, and subscribe to the channel for more jaw-dropping true tales. Isabella Morrison had always prided herself on having the perfect life. At 36, she was 7 months pregnant with her first child, married to tech billionaire Richard Morrison, and living in a stunning Malibu mansion that graced the covers of architectural magazines. But as she sat in her pearl-white Bentley outside Dr. Martinez's office, her hands trembling as she stared at the ultrasound photos scattered across her lap, she realized that perfection was nothing more than a beautifully crafted illusion. The betrayal had started with a simple mistake, a text message meant for someone else that had accidentally found its way to her phone just 6 hours earlier. Even now, the words burned in her memory like acid. Can't wait to be free of the pregnant cow. Paris tomorrow, S. Isabella's heart had stopped when she saw it, not because of the cruel words, though they cut deep, but because she recognized the sender. Sophia Chen, Richard's 28-year-old assistant, the same woman who had been working late nights with her husband, the same woman who had been conveniently present at every important business dinner, every charity gala, every moment of their life together. The pregnant wife betrayed scenario playing out in her mind wasn't new to the world, but it felt devastatingly personal. Isabella had given up her successful marketing career 3 years ago when Richard convinced her that being a full-time wife was a nobler calling. She had trusted him completely, believing in their love story, their future together, their growing family. Now, as storm clouds gathered overhead, matching the tempest brewing in her heart, Isabella pulled into the circular driveway of their home. The mansion stood like a fortress against the darkening sky, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the lightning that split the horizon. She had once thought this place represented everything she had ever wanted. Now it felt like a prison. Richard's black Tesla was parked in its usual spot, but there was another car beside it, a red BMW that Isabella didn't recognize. Her stomach clenched as she realized what this meant. The husband affair with Mistress wasn't just emotional, it was happening right here, in their home, while she was at her prenatal appointment learning about their child's development. Taking a deep breath, Isabella placed her hand on her swollen belly. "We're going to face this together, little one," she whispered to her unborn son. The baby kicked in response, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. The front door was unlocked, which was unusual. Richard was paranoid about security, always lecturing her about keeping the house secure. But today, in his arrogance and lust, he had been careless. Isabella slipped off her heels, her bare feet silent on the imported Italian marble as she made her way through the foyer. The sound of laughter drifted down from the master bedroom, feminine laughter that definitely wasn't hers. Isabella's heart pounded so hard she was afraid it might wake the baby. She climbed the curved staircase, each step feeling like a march toward her own execution. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and what Isabella saw through the crack shattered the last remnants of her old life. Richard, her husband, the father of her child, the man who had promised to love and cherish her forever, was in their bed with Sophia. They weren't just having an affair, they were celebrating something. Champagne glasses on the nightstand, rose petals scattered across sheets that Isabella had picked out for their anniversary just 2 months ago. "Once she's out of the picture, we can finally be together," Sophia was saying, her voice carrying clearly across the room. The pregnancy makes her so emotional and unstable. It'll be easy to convince everyone she had a breakdown. Richard's response made Isabella's blood run cold. The plan is already in motion. After tonight, she won't be a problem anymore. We'll have everything: the money, the house, the company, and most importantly, no screaming baby to deal with. Isabella stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a gasp. The heartbreaking family drama unfolding before her was worse than simple adultery. They were planning something, something that involved her disappearance, something that would leave her child without a mother. She needed evidence. With shaking hands, Isabella pulled out her phone and began recording. The video quality wasn't perfect from her hidden position, but the audio was crystal clear. Richard's voice, cold and calculated, planning her demise while making love to his mistress. "Are you sure the prenatal vitamins will work?" Sophia asked, her voice tinged with concern. "Trust me, darling. A little pharmaceutical adjustment, and she'll be unconscious within an hour. The beauty of it is that it'll look like pregnancy complications. No one questions a tragic accident with a high-risk pregnancy." Isabella's knees nearly gave out. Her prenatal vitamins, the same ones she had taken religiously every morning for months, the ones Richard always made sure to refill for her. He had been drugging her, planning to kill her slowly, methodically. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if sensing the danger. Isabella pressed her hand to her belly, drawing strength from the life growing inside her. She had to be smart about this. One wrong move, and both she and her son would be dead. Backing away from the door, Isabella made her way downstairs and outside to her car. She needed help, needed someone who would believe her story. But who Richard had systematically isolated her from her friends over the years, convincing her that they were jealous of her success, that they didn't really care about her. Her mother lived across the country and was already suspicious of Richard's controlling behavior. There was Marcus Webb, her divorce attorney, though she had only consulted him about updating their will, not about ending their marriage. Marcus had been a friend in college, someone who knew her before Richard, before the transformation into a society wife. If anyone would believe her story, it would be him. Isabella's hands shook as she dialed his number. The rain began to fall in earnest now, heavy drops spattering against her windshield like tears from heaven. "Marcus, it's Isabella Morrison. I need your help. Something terrible is happening, and I don't know who else to call." "Isabella, you sound terrified. Where are you?" "I'm sitting outside my house, and I just discovered that my husband is planning to kill me. I have evidence, but I don't think I'm safe here anymore." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Marcus had always been direct, practical, never one for dramatics. "I'm on my way. Don't go back inside that house. Do you understand? Drive to the coffee shop on Pacific Coast Highway and wait for me there. If you feel unsafe at any point, call 911 immediately." As Isabella started her car, she caught a glimpse of movement in the master bedroom window. Richard was there, looking down at her with an expression she had never seen before. Cold, calculating, predatory. He raised his hand in what might have looked like a friendly wave to any observer. But Isabella saw it for what it really was, a promise that this wasn't over. The pregnant wife betrayed story had taken a turn towards something much darker than simple infidelity. This was about survival now, about protecting her unborn child from a man who saw them both as obstacles to his perfect life with his younger mistress. As she drove toward town, Isabella's mind raced with possibilities. Richard was right about one thing. Who would believe her? He was a beloved philanthropist, a tech genius who had donated millions to children's charities. She was just a housewife with pregnancy hormones and a history of anxiety that he had carefully documented with their family doctor. But Isabella had one advantage that Richard didn't know about. She wasn't the weak, dependent woman he thought she was. Before their marriage, she had built 2 successful marketing companies from the ground up. She understood strategy, manipulation, and public relations better than almost anyone. If Richard wanted to play games, she would show him what a real game looked like. The coffee shop was nearly empty due to the storm, just a few customers nursing hot drinks while rain lashed the windows. Isabella ordered decaf tea and found a corner booth where she could watch the entrance. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Where are you? I'm worried about you driving in this weather." The audacity of his concern would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifying. Isabella didn't respond. Instead, she used the time to upload the video she had recorded to a secure cloud account, making sure it would be preserved even if something happened to her phone. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later, his usually immaculate lawyer appearance disheveled from the rain. He was still the same man she had known in college, tall, dark-haired, with intelligent brown eyes that missed nothing. Seeing him felt like finding a life raft in a stormy sea. "Tell me everything," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. Isabella showed him the video, watched his expression grow increasingly grave as Richard's voice filled the small space between them. When it was over, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "This is attempted murder," he said finally. "We need to get you somewhere safe and call the police immediately." "It's not that simple," Isabella replied. "Richard has connections everywhere. The police chief plays golf with him every weekend. The district attorney was at our last dinner party. Even if they believe me initially, his lawyers will tear me apart. They'll claim pregnancy hormones made me delusional, that the video is fake or taken out of context." Marcus nodded grimly. "Then we need more evidence. We need to document everything. The drug vitamins, the financial records, anything that shows premeditation." "There's something else," Isabella said quietly. "I don't think I'm his first victim." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean Richard was married twice before me? Both wives died in accidents. One in a car crash, another from an apparent suicide. At the time, I thought he was just unlucky in love. Now I'm wondering if luck had nothing to do with it." The implications hung heavy in the air between them. If Isabella was right, Richard Morrison wasn't just an unfaithful husband. He was a serial killer who had perfected the art of murdering his wives and making it look accidental. "We need to be very careful about how we proceed," Marcus said. "If he's done this before and gotten away with it, he's not going to hesitate to escalate if he feels cornered." As if summoned by their conversation, Isabella's phone rang. Richard's name appeared on the screen, and both she and Marcus stared at it. "Answer it," Marcus whispered. "Act normal. Don't let him know you suspect anything." Isabella accepted the call, her voice carefully modulated to sound tired but unsuspicious. "Hi, honey. Sorry I didn't respond to your text. I stopped for coffee on the way home. I was worried about you driving in this storm. Why don't you stay wherever you are until it passes? I can come pick you up." The offer sounded caring, but Isabella could hear the underlying threat. He wanted to know where she was, wanted to control her movements. "That's sweet of you, but I'm already heading home. I'll be careful." "Isabella?" Richard's voice took on a different quality, softer but somehow more menacing. "You know I love you and our baby more than anything in the world. Right, I would do anything to protect our family." The words were loving, but Isabella heard the subtext clearly. He knew she had been home. He knew she had seen something. This was his way of telling her that resistance was futile. "I love you too," she managed to say. "See you soon." When she hung up, Marcus was already pulling out his own phone. "We're not going back to that house tonight. I'm calling a friend who runs a women's shelter. They have secure facilities and experience dealing with dangerous situations." "I can't run away," Isabella protested. "If I disappear now, it'll look like I'm the unstable one. Richard will spin this whole thing to make himself look like the victim. And if you go back to that house, you and your baby could end up dead." Marcus shot back. "We need time to build a case, to find evidence that will stick. That means keeping you alive long enough to do it." Isabella knew he was right, but the thought of abandoning her home, her life, everything she had worked for, felt like another kind of death. The financial hardship after betrayal would be just the beginning. She would lose everything: her social standing, her security, her identity as Mrs. Richard Morrison. But as the baby kicked again, reminding her of what was truly at stake, Isabella made her choice. Okay, but we do this smart. We make Richard think he's winning while we gather evidence. And when we're ready, we don't just expose him, we destroy him completely. Marcus smiled for the first time since arriving. Now that sounds like the Isabella Morrison I knew in college, the one who never backed down from a fight. As they prepared to leave the coffee shop, Isabella caught sight of her reflection in the rain-streaked window. She looked older than her 36 years, worn down by months of subtle manipulation and control. But there was something else in her eyes now, a spark of determination that had been missing for years. The pregnant wife betrayed was about to become something much more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The women's shelter was nothing like Isabella had imagined, instead of the institutional building she expected. Marcus led her to a Victorian house in Santa Monica that looked like any other family home on the tree-lined street. Only the discreet security cameras and reinforced windows hinted at its true purpose. Dr. Elena Rodriguez met them at the door. She was a woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, pulled back in a practical bun. Her presence was immediately calming, the sort of person who had seen every form of human suffering and still believed in the possibility of healing. Isabella, I'm glad you're safe, Dr. Rodriguez said, leading them into a comfortable living room decorated with soft colors and family photos of women and children who had found refuge here. Marcus has told me a little about your situation. You're not the first woman to discover that the man she married isn't who she thought he was. Isabella sank into an overstuffed armchair, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the last few hours was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. I keep thinking this is all a nightmare. That I'll wake up tomorrow and find out I imagined everything. That's a normal response to trauma, Dr. Rodriguez explained. Your mind is trying to protect you from a reality that's too painful to accept all at once. But you're going to need to face this head-on if you want to survive it. Marcus had been quiet since they arrived, but now he pulled out a folder thick with documents. I've been doing some research while you two talked. Isabella, your husband's financial situation isn't what it appears to be. Isabella looked up sharply. What do you mean? Morrison Tech has been hemorrhaging money for the past 2 years. The company's latest product launch was a complete failure, and they're facing multiple lawsuits over patent infringement. Richard has been liquidating personal assets to keep the company afloat, but he's running out of options. The information hit Isabella like a physical blow. But the charitable donations, the lifestyle, the new investments, all funded by debt and creative accounting. If the company goes under, Richard faces both bankruptcy and criminal charges for fraud. He needs a way out, and unfortunately, you represent his biggest liability and his best opportunity. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward. Explain that to me. Marcus spread the papers across the coffee table. Isabella, your life insurance policy is worth $50 million. If you die in an apparent accident, Richard collects the money and can claim you were emotionally unstable due to the pregnancy. It would explain any financial irregularities as the desperate acts of a grieving widower. Isabella's hand moved instinctively to her belly. And the baby would inherit the majority of the estate, with Richard as guardian. He'd have complete control over your son's inheritance until the boy turns 21. Plenty of time to disappear with the money. The heartbreaking family drama was revealing new layers of calculation and greed. Isabella had thought Richard's affair was about lust or midlife crisis, but it was actually about survival. She and her unborn child weren't just inconveniences, they were business problems that needed to be solved. There's more, Marcus continued. I pulled the death certificates for Richard's previous wives. Catherine Morrison died in a single-car accident on a rainy night, very similar to tonight's weather. Sarah Morrison apparently jumped from their apartment balcony after leaving a suicide note about feeling overwhelmed by depression. Both had substantial life insurance policies, Dr. Rodriguez observed. Both died at convenient times when Richard was facing financial pressure. Isabella felt sick. How did no one see the pattern? Because Richard is very good at what he does, Marcus replied. He chooses vulnerable women. Catherine was dealing with her mother's death. Sarah had a history of depression, and you were struggling with infertility issues when you met him. He builds you up, makes you dependent on him, then isolates you from anyone who might notice warning signs. It was true, and Isabella could see the pattern now. Richard had gradually convinced her to quit her job, move away from her support network, even stop seeing her therapist because he could provide all the emotional support she needed. The midlife betrayal story was really a story about a predator who had been grooming his victim for years. Dr. Rodriguez handed Isabella a cup of chamomile tea. The important thing to remember is that recognizing the manipulation is the first step in breaking free from it. You're not stupid or weak for falling into this trap. Richard is a professional manipulator who has refined his technique over multiple victims. But how do we prove it? Isabella asked. Even with the video I recorded, his lawyers will claim it was taken out of context or that I misunderstood what I was hearing. We need to be strategic, Marcus said. Richard thinks he holds all the cards, but he's made mistakes. The first one was underestimating you. The second was leaving evidence. Isabella looked up. What kind of evidence? The prenatal vitamins he's been doctoring. If we can get them tested, we'll have proof of attempted poisoning, but we need to get them from your house without tipping him off. That's impossible. He'll be watching for me to come back. Dr. Rodriguez smiled. Not necessarily. Richard is expecting the frightened, dependent wife he spent years creating. He's not expecting the marketing executive who built companies from nothing. Isabella felt a spark of her old confidence returning. What do you mean you understand psychology and manipulation better than almost anyone? You've just been the target instead of the practitioner. It's time to turn the tables. Over the next hour, they crafted a plan. Isabella would return home and act the part of the confused, emotional pregnant woman. She would apologize for being dramatic, blame pregnancy hormones for her paranoia, and beg Richard's forgiveness. While playing the role of the submissive wife, she would gather evidence and document everything. It's dangerous, Marcus warned. If Richard suspects you're acting, then I'll have to be the performance of my life, Isabella replied. But I know how to read people, how to give them what they want to hear. Richard wants a victim. I'll give him one, while secretly building the case that will destroy him. Dr. Rodriguez looked concerned. Isabella, I need you to understand the psychological toll this will take. Acting weak and helpless when you're actually fighting for your life is a form of trauma in itself. You'll need support. I'll be monitoring everything, Marcus added. Hidden cameras, recording devices, regular check-ins. If anything goes wrong, we extract you immediately. As they discussed logistics, Isabella's phone buzzed with another text from Richard. Starting to worry. Storm is getting worse. Please come home so I know you're safe. The irony of his concern for her safety would have been laughable if the situation weren't so dire. Isabella typed back, On my way home now. Sorry for worrying you. Are you ready for this, Dr. Rodriguez asked. Isabella looked around the room at the photos of women who had escaped dangerous situations, women who had rebuilt their lives from nothing. The therapy and self-discovery journey wasn't just about healing from trauma. It was about rediscovering the strength that had always been inside her. 3 years ago, I was a successful businesswoman who could negotiate million-dollar deals and build companies from concepts, Isabella said. Richard may have convinced me that woman was gone, but she wasn't. She was just sleeping. As Isabella prepared to return to what might be the most dangerous performance of her life, she felt the baby kick again. This time, instead of fear, she felt determination. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her son's future, and she would use every weapon at her disposal. The pregnant wife betrayed was about to become the predator. The mansion looked different when Isabella pulled into the driveway. Same imposing facade, same perfectly manicured landscaping, but now she could see it for what it really was. a beautiful prison designed to isolate and control. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and sharp with the scent of rain-washed jasmine. Richard was waiting at the front door before she even parked, his face a mask of concern that she now recognized as carefully crafted manipulation. He was wearing the casual sweater she had bought him for his birthday, the one that made his eyes look warm and trustworthy. Every detail of his appearance was calculated to remind her of their happy moments together. "Thank God you're safe," he said, rushing to help her out of the car. His hands on her arms felt like shackles now instead of loving support. "I was so worried when you didn't come straight home." Isabella forced herself to lean into his embrace, to play the role of the grateful wife. "I'm sorry. I stopped for coffee and just got caught up in my thoughts. You know how emotional I get these days." Richard's smile was warm, but Isabella could see the relief in his eyes. He believed her story, believed she was still the malleable woman he thought he had created. "Pregnancy brain is a real thing. Dr. Martinez mentioned you might experience some mood swings and confusion as you get closer to your due date." The casual mention of her doctor sent a chill down Isabella's spine. How much of her medical information had Richard been accessing? How long had he been planning this? "Speaking of Dr. Martinez," Richard continued, guiding her toward the house. "He called earlier to check on you. Apparently, your blood pressure was a little elevated today. He wants you to take it easy for the next few days." Isabella knew Dr. Martinez hadn't called. This was Richard's way of establishing the narrative, the unstable pregnant woman whose condition was deteriorating. If something happened to her in the next few days, there would be a medical trail to support his story. "I do feel a little lightheaded," Isabella agreed, playing into his script. "Maybe I should lie down." "That's a wonderful idea. Why don't you get comfortable, and I'll bring you some tea and your vitamins. You missed your evening dose." "The vitamins?" Isabella's stomach clenched, but she forced herself to nod gratefully. "You're so good to me. Richard, I don't know what I'd do without you." The words tasted like poison, but Richard's expression brightened. This was what he wanted, the dependent, grateful wife who couldn't imagine life without him. As they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, Isabella noted every detail with new eyes. The security cameras he claimed were for protection, the locks that could only be opened from the outside, the windows that didn't open fully. The bedroom had been cleaned and reset, all evidence of the afternoon's activities erased. Fresh flowers sat on the nightstand where the champagne glasses had been, and the bed was made with different sheets. If Isabella hadn't seen the betrayal with her own eyes, she might have believed she had imagined it. "I'll be right back with your tea," Richard said, kissing her forehead with practiced tenderness. "Try to rest." As soon as he left, Isabella sprang into action. The tiny camera Marcus had given her was disguised as a decorative pin, and she quickly attached it to the lamp on her nightstand where it would have a clear view of the room. A second recording device, no bigger than a button, went under the bed frame. Her prenatal vitamins sat in their usual spot in the bathroom medicine cabinet. Isabella carefully opened the bottle and examined the pills. They looked normal, but Richard was too smart to use something obvious. She quickly switched out half the pills with identical-looking vitamins Marcus had provided, leaving enough of the originals for testing. The sound of Richard's footsteps on the stairs sent her scrambling back to bed. By the time he entered with a tea service and her vitamins, Isabella was propped against the pillows looking pale and fragile. "Here we go," Richard said, handing her the pills and a glass of water. "Dr. Martinez said these would help with the blood pressure issues." Isabella's heart pounded as she looked at the pills in her palm, two innocuous-looking capsules that could be her death sentence. But she had to maintain the performance, had to make Richard believe his plan was working. "Thank you for taking such good care of me," she said, lifting the pills toward her mouth. At the last second, she pretended to fumble, dropping one of the pills on the floor. "Oh no, I'm so clumsy lately." Richard immediately bent to retrieve it, and in that moment of distraction, Isabella palmed both pills and pretended to swallow the water. It was a sleight of hand trick she had learned in college theater, but she had never imagined using it to save her life. Don't worry about it, Richard said, handing her the dropped pill. Take this one too, just to be safe. Isabella pretended to swallow the second pill as well, all while maintaining eye contact with her husband. The man who had promised to love and protect her was now trying to murder her with the same gentle smile he used to give her vitamins every morning. I'm feeling sleepy already, Isabella lied, settling back against the pillows. The tea is helping. Richard sat on the edge of the bed, his hand resting on her belly. You and the baby are the most important things in my life. I need you to know that, no matter what happens. The words were chilling in their sincerity. Richard genuinely believed he was solving a problem, that eliminating Isabella was a necessary business decision. In his mind, he wasn't a monster, he was a pragmatist. I love you too, Isabella whispered, closing her eyes to hide the revulsion she felt. Richard stayed for another few minutes, watching her carefully. Isabella focused on keeping her breathing slow and even, occasionally fluttering her eyelids as if fighting sleep. Finally, apparently satisfied that the drugs were taking effect, Richard kissed her forehead and left the room. Isabella waited until she heard his office door close downstairs before allowing herself to move. Her hands were shaking from adrenaline and fear, but she forced herself to focus. She had maybe an hour before Richard would expect her to be completely unconscious. Working quickly, she planted additional recording devices around the house, in Richard's office, the kitchen, the living room. Marcus had explained that they needed evidence of Richard's normal behavior, his interactions with Sophia, his business calls. One video of him planning her death wasn't enough. They needed to build a comprehensive picture of his criminal enterprise. The hardest part was accessing Richard's computer. His office door was closed but not locked, another sign of his arrogance. Isabella slipped inside and powered up his laptop, grateful that she remembered his password from the early days of their marriage when he had been less secretive. His email was a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. Messages to offshore banks about transferring funds, communications with insurance companies about policy details, and most damning of all, a thread with Sophia discussing timing and logistics. Phase 1 complete by Thursday. One email read, Phase 2 implementation weekend. France departure Monday. Isabella screenshot everything she could find, sending copies to the encrypted email account Marcus had set up for her. The baby kicked restlessly as she worked, as if sensing the danger they were in. A sound from downstairs made her freeze. Footsteps in the hallway, moving toward the kitchen. Isabella quickly closed the laptop and crept to the office door, listening carefully. Richard was on the phone, his voice low but carrying clearly in the silent house. Yes, it's working perfectly. She should be completely unconscious within the hour. No, there won't be any pain. I'm not a monster. Sophia. Of course I've thought this through. The wine cellar will preserve the body until we can stage the accident. Monday morning, they'll find her in the car at the bottom of Mulholland Drive. Tragic accident. Pregnant woman driving erratically due to hormonal imbalance. Isabella's blood ran cold. The wine cellar, the temperature-controlled room in the basement where Richard kept his collection of rare vintages. He was planning to store her body there, like another bottle of expensive wine. The husband affair with Mistress had escalated to cold-blooded murder planning, and Isabella was listening to her own death being orchestrated in real time. The insurance payout will clear all our debts and leave us set for life, Richard continued. We can start over in France, just like we planned. No screaming babies, no financial pressure, just us and the money to enjoy ourselves. Isabella realized she was crying silently, tears of rage more than fear. This wasn't just about her life. It was about her son's life, about all the future wives Richard would manipulate and destroy if he wasn't stopped. Footsteps moved toward the stairs, and Isabella quickly made her way back to the bedroom. She had just enough time to hide the evidence and arrange herself in bed before Richard's soft knock on the door. Just checking on you, darling, he whispered, peering around the doorframe. Isabella forced her breathing to remain deep and even, her body limp and unresponsive. Richard approached the bed and lifted her eyelid, checking her pupil response. His touch was clinical now, The loving husband mask completely dropped, apparently satisfied that she was unconscious. Richard made a phone call. "She's out. Bring the car around to the service entrance. We'll move her to the wine cellar now and stage the accident tomorrow night after the search teams give up." Isabella's heart hammered so hard she was sure Richard would hear it, but he was already moving away, focused on the logistics of disposing of her body. The pregnant wife betrayed story was about to become a murder story unless Isabella could find a way to turn the tables. But first, she had to survive the next few hours without revealing that she was wide awake and recording everything. As Richard's footsteps faded down the hallway, Isabella allowed herself one moment of pure terror. Then she reached for her phone and sent a single text to Marcus. "Emergency. Phase 2 starting now. Wine cellar. Come immediately." The performance of her life was about to become a fight for her life. Isabella lay perfectly still as she heard Richard's footsteps returning, accompanied by heavier boots that could only belong to security personnel. Through barely cracked eyelids, she watched 3 men enter her bedroom. Richard, a burly man she recognized as the head of their security team, and someone she didn't know wearing surgical gloves. "Careful with her," Richard instructed as they approached the bed. "We can't have any unexplained bruises or injuries." Isabella forced every muscle in her body to remain limp as they lifted her from the bed. The security guard, whose name she remembered was Thompson, seemed uncomfortable with the situation. "Mr. Morrison, are you sure about this if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong," Richard snapped. "We've planned every detail. By Monday morning, this will all be over, and we'll be free to start our new lives." They carried her down the service stairs that the household staff used, through the kitchen, and down another flight to the basement. Isabella had only been in the wine cellar a few times. It was Richard's domain, temperature controlled and humidity regulated to preserve his collection of rare vintages. Now it would serve as her tomb. The air grew cooler as they descended, and Isabella could smell the earthy scent of aged wine and stone. The wine cellar was larger than most people's living rooms, with floor-to-ceiling racks holding thousands of bottles. At the far end was a temperature-controlled storage unit where Richard kept his most precious wines. "Put her in the preservation unit," Richard directed. "The temperature will keep the body fresh until we're ready." Isabella's skin crawled at the casual way he referred to her as the body, but she maintained her performance. They laid her on the metal shelf inside the unit, the cold immediately seeping through her clothing. "What about the baby?" the unknown man asked. He spoke with a slight accent that Isabella couldn't place. "Complications during pregnancy," Richard replied smoothly. "Very tragic, but it happens. The autopsy will show that the stress of the accident caused premature labor." They were planning to kill her son too. The realization hit Isabella like a physical blow, but she forced herself to remain still. She had to stay alive long enough for Marcus to arrive, had to find a way to turn this trap against Richard. "Lock it up," Richard ordered. "We'll move her to the car tomorrow night and stage the accident." The preservation unit door closed with a soft hiss, sealing Isabella into darkness. She waited until she heard their footsteps recede before allowing herself to move. The space was cramped, maybe 6 feet by 3 feet, with just enough height for her to sit up partially. Her phone had no signal this deep underground, but she could see that Marcus had read her text. Help was coming, but she had to survive until it arrived. The temperature in the unit was probably around 40 degrees, cold enough to preserve wine, cold enough to kill a pregnant woman if she stayed too long. Isabella began examining her prison, running her hands along the walls looking for any weakness. The unit was well built, designed to maintain perfect conditions for wine storage, but it wasn't designed to hold a human prisoner, and the builders had never imagined someone trying to escape from the inside. Near the floor, Isabella found what she was looking for, an emergency release mechanism that would prevent someone from being accidentally locked inside. The handle was small and hidden, but when she pulled it, the door cracked open slightly. Fresh air flooded in, and Isabella took her first deep breath since being sealed inside. She could hear voices from the main cellar. Richard was still down there with his accomplices. probably making final preparations. Through the crack in the door, Isabella could see them moving around the wine cellar. Richard had pulled out several bottles of expensive wine and was opening them. The unknown man was setting up what looked like camera equipment. "We need to document this properly," Richard was saying. "The video will show Isabella's deteriorating mental state, her threats to hurt herself and the baby. When they find the body, it'll all make sense." Isabella's blood chilled as she realized what they were planning. They were going to film her supposed suicide, creating evidence that would support Richard's story. The heartbreaking family drama would become a story of mental illness and tragedy, with Richard as the grieving widower. But they had made one crucial mistake. They thought she was unconscious. Isabella pulled out her phone and began recording everything she could see and hear through the crack in the door. This wasn't just evidence of attempted murder anymore. It was evidence of an elaborate conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. "The beauty of this plan," Richard continued, clearly enjoying explaining his brilliance, "is that everyone will sympathize with me. The successful businessman whose pregnant wife suffered a tragic breakdown, I'll be able to grieve publicly, start the foundation in her memory, and no one will question how I rebuild my life." "And Sophia," Thompson asked, "will be the supportive friend who helped me through my darkest hour. After a respectable grieving period, we'll announce our relationship. No one will think it's suspicious. Everyone knows how much Isabella struggled with her mental health." Isabella realized that Richard had been building this narrative for months, maybe years. Every time he had encouraged her to see the family doctor for anxiety. Every time he had mentioned her mood swings to friends. Every time he had painted her as emotionally unstable. It had all been preparation for this moment. The sound of footsteps above made everyone in the cellar freeze. Someone was in the house. "Are you expecting anyone?" the unknown man asked. Richard shook his head, moving toward the cellar stairs. "Thompson, go check it out. If it's anything suspicious, handle it quietly." Isabella's heart leaped. It had to be Marcus. She had to find a way to signal him, to let him know where she was before Richard's men found him. As Thompson disappeared upstairs, Isabella carefully pushed the preservation unit door open further. She could see Richard and his accomplice clearly now, Richard pacing nervously while the other man checked his camera equipment. "Maybe we should postpone this," the cameraman suggested. "If someone's looking for her—" "No," Richard snapped. "We stick to the plan. Everything is already in motion. Sophia is posting on social media about being worried about Isabella's state of mind. The insurance company has been alerted to watch for any suspicious activity. We can't back out now." Isabella realized the scope of Richard's planning went far beyond what she had imagined. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity. It was a meticulously planned operation involving multiple accomplices and months of preparation. The sound of a struggle upstairs made them all look toward the ceiling. Voices, muffled but urgent, filtered down through the floor. "That's not Thompson," Richard muttered, pulling out his phone. When Thompson didn't answer, Richard's face darkened. "We have a problem. Maybe we should get out of here," the cameraman suggested, "and go where everything we've worked for is tied up in this plan. If we run now, we lose everything." Here, Richard looked toward the preservation unit where he thought Isabella's unconscious body lay. A calculating expression crossed his face, and Isabella realized he was about to check on her. "Change of plans," Richard announced. "We finish this now." He started toward the preservation unit, and Isabella knew her time was up. She couldn't maintain the unconscious act much longer, and once Richard discovered she was awake, any chance of survival would disappear. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing the danger, and Isabella made a split-second decision. Instead of trying to hide, she burst out of the preservation unit with all the fury of a mother protecting her child. "You want to kill me," she screamed, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "Then look me in the eyes while you do it." Richard stumbled backward, his face a mask of shock and fury. "You're supposed to be unconscious." "Surprise, darling. Your wife is smarter than you thought." The cameraman had stepped back, clearly not prepared for this confrontation. But Richard's expression shifted from shock to cold determination. "It doesn't matter," he said. "No one will believe you. You're an unstable pregnant woman who's been having delusions." "Maybe," Isabella replied, holding up her phone. "But they'll believe this." She pressed play on the video she had been recording, and Richard's voice filled the cellar. "The wine cellar will preserve the body until we can stage the accident." For the first time since this nightmare began, Isabella saw real fear in her husband's eyes. The pregnant wife betrayed had just become the hunter. The silence in the wine cellar stretched taut as Richard stared at Isabella's phone, his face cycling through shock, rage, and calculation. The cameraman had moved toward the stairs, clearly wanting to flee, but Richard grabbed his arm. "Don't even think about it," Richard hissed. "We're all in this together now." Isabella kept the phone held high, though her hand was shaking. "It's over, Richard. I have everything. The drugged vitamins, the financial records, your emails with Sophia, and now this. Even your high-priced lawyers can't explain away attempted murder." Richard's laugh was hollow, devoid of any warmth she had ever imagined she heard from him. "You naive little fool. Do you really think anyone will believe you? I'm Richard Morrison, beloved philanthropist and grieving widower. You're a mentally unstable pregnant woman who's been making wild accusations. I have proof. Proof can be explained away. Deep fake technology, pregnancy-induced paranoia, a desperate woman trying to save face after discovering her husband's affair." Richard stepped closer, his voice dropping to the manipulative tone that had controlled her for years. "Who do you think they'll believe, Isabella? The successful businessman with a spotless reputation, or the housewife who abandoned her career and became completely dependent on her husband?" For a moment, doubt crept into Isabella's mind. Richard was right about one thing. He had spent years building the perfect public image while systematically destroying her credibility. But then the baby kicked, reminding her what was at stake. "Maybe you're right," Isabella said quietly. "Maybe no one will believe me, but they'll have to investigate, won't they? And investigations have a way of uncovering inconvenient truths." "Like what?" "Like the fact that this isn't your first time. Catherine Morrison, car accident in 2018. Sarah Morrison, apparent suicide in 2020. Both conveniently died when you were facing financial problems. Both left you substantial insurance payouts." Richard's mask slipped completely, revealing the cold predator underneath. "You've been busy. I learned from the best. You taught me everything I know about research and strategy. Remember back when you thought I was useful to you?" The sound of footsteps above had stopped, replaced by an ominous silence. Isabella hoped that meant Marcus had found and dealt with Thompson, but she couldn't count on rescue. She had to find a way out of this herself. "Here's what's going to happen," Richard said, his voice taking on the commanding tone he used in business meetings. "You're going to delete that video and any other so-called evidence you think you have. Then you're going to go upstairs and take the real vitamins, the full dose. You'll write a suicide note explaining your depression and fear about becoming a mother. It'll all be very tragic and believable. And if I refuse," Richard nodded to the cameraman, who reluctantly produced a gun, "then you'll have an accident right here, right now. A break-in gone wrong, perhaps. Either way, you're not leaving this cellar alive." Isabella's mind raced. She was trapped underground with two men willing to kill her. Her phone had no signal to call for help, and even if Marcus was upstairs, he might not know where to find her. But Richard had made one crucial error. He still thought she was the helpless woman he had created. He didn't know about the emergency beacon Marcus had given her, currently broadcasting her location to law enforcement. He didn't know about the evidence already uploaded to secure servers. Most importantly, he didn't know that Isabella Morrison, the marketing executive, had never actually died. She had just been sleeping. "You want a confession?" Isabella asked, appearing to capitulate. "Fine, but I want to understand why. Help me understand how the man I loved could plan to murder his own child." Richard's ego, always his weakness, made him want to explain his brilliance. "It was never personal. Isabella, you have to understand. I had no choice. The company was failing. The creditors were closing in. I needed capital, and insurance was the only viable option. But why me? Why not just divorce me and start over? Divorce would have meant splitting assets I didn't actually have, and you knew too much about the company's finances. You helped build the marketing strategy that covered up our losses. A divorce would have meant scrutiny, questions, audits. So you decided murder was easier. I decided survival was necessary. In 5 years, no one will remember Isabella Morrison, but they'll remember Richard Morrison, the man who overcame tragedy to build a charitable empire in his wife's memory. Isabella realized that Richard genuinely saw himself as the victim in this scenario. In his mind, she and their son were obstacles to his success, problems to be eliminated rather than people to be loved. "And Sophia?" Isabella asked, buying time while listening for any sound from upstairs. "Sophia understands the business world. She knows that sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good. She'll be a much more suitable partner for this phase of my life. The phase where you're a widower with a tragic backstory and $50 million in insurance money." "Exactly," Richard smiled, apparently pleased that she finally understood. "You always were good at grasping the bigger picture." Isabella had heard enough, more than enough. She looked at her husband, this stranger wearing Richard's face, and felt something inside her break. Not her spirit, but the last chains of the woman he had tried to make her. "You're absolutely right," she said. "I do understand the bigger picture. The question is, do you—" Before Richard could respond, Isabella threw her phone as hard as she could against the stone wall. It shattered in a shower of plastic and glass, but not before she saw the text notification that appeared on the screen. "Police in position. Go signal received." Richard stared at the broken phone in confusion. "What did you just do?" "I activated the emergency beacon," Isabella said calmly. "The one that's been broadcasting our location to the FBI for the last 20 minutes. The same FBI agents who are probably arresting Sophia right about now." The color drained from Richard's face. "You're lying." "Am I? Think about it. Richard, I spent 3 years learning how to be the perfect victim, but I spent 12 years before that learning how to be a strategic thinker. Did you really believe I would come back here without a plan?" The sound of footsteps on the cellar stairs made everyone freeze. But these weren't the careful footsteps of Thompson returning. These were the heavy, purposeful steps of multiple people moving fast. "FBI, everyone on the ground. Now!" Richard's face twisted with rage as he realized he had been outplayed. "You think this is over? I'll destroy you in court. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of woman you really are." Isabella smiled for the first time in months, and it wasn't the careful, pleasing smile she had perfected as Richard's wife. It was the confident, fierce smile of a woman who had just saved her own life. "Go ahead and try," she said as FBI agents flooded into the cellar. "But remember, I learned manipulation and public relations from you, and unlike you, I'm not planning to murder anyone to get what I want." As they handcuffed Richard, he looked at her with something approaching respect. "Who are you?" "I'm Isabella Morrison," she replied. "The real one. The one you tried to kill but couldn't quite manage to bury." The pregnant wife betrayed had become something Richard never saw coming, a worthy opponent who had beaten him at his own game. The FBI field office in Los Angeles was nothing like the sterile government buildings Isabella had imagined. Agent Sarah Chen, no relation to Sophia, as she was quick to point out, led Isabella through a maze of cubicles and conference rooms to a comfortable interview suite with soft lighting and upholstered chairs. "I know this has been traumatic," Agent Chen said, settling across from Isabella with a thick file. "But I need you to walk me through everything again. Every detail could be crucial for the prosecution." Isabella had already told her story 3 times, once to the responding officers, once to the local detectives, and once to Agent Chen's partner. But she understood the importance of consistency, especially when facing someone with Richard's resources and legal connections. The thing I keep coming back to, Isabella said, is how long he had been planning this. It wasn't just the last few months. He's been building this narrative for years. Agent Chen nodded. We're seeing that pattern. The domestic abuse experts call it long-term psychological preparation. The abuser slowly conditions the victim and the community to accept a specific narrative. What do you mean? Think about it. How many times did Richard mention your mood swings to friends? How often did he insist on accompanying you to doctor's appointments? How frequently did he apologize to others for your emotional state? Isabella felt sick as she realized the scope of Richard's manipulation. He was building a case for my mental instability years before he decided to kill me. And he documented everything. We found files on his computer going back 5 years, tracking your behavior, your medical appointments, even your conversations with friends. He was building a profile that would support his story if anyone questioned your death. The heartbreaking family drama wasn't just about murder. It was about the systematic destruction of a woman's credibility and identity over the course of years. Isabella had been living in a carefully constructed prison of psychological manipulation. What about Sophia? Isabella asked. Agent Chen's expression darkened. Sophia Chen is proving to be even more interesting than your husband. Did you know she's actually Dr. Sophia Chen, a psychiatrist who lost her license 3 years ago for manipulating patients? Isabella's blood chilled. A psychiatrist. She was convicted of insurance fraud for manufacturing false psychiatric diagnoses to support disability claims. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. We're finding evidence that she's been running a much larger operation. Agent Chen opened the file and spread photographs across the table. They showed various women, all married to wealthy men, all bearing a striking resemblance to each other in terms of age and appearance. We think Sophia targets specific types of men, wealthy, controlling, with a history of failed relationships. She insinuates herself into their lives, usually as an employee or business partner, and then begins the process of eliminating their wives. How many women? We're still investigating, but we've identified at least 12 suspicious deaths over the past 7 years. All wealthy wives, all deaths ruled accidental or suicide, all leaving substantial insurance payouts. Isabella stared at the photographs, seeing her own story reflected in a dozen other faces. How did no one notice the pattern? Because Sophia is very good at what she does. She never operates in the same jurisdiction twice, never uses the same method twice, and she always ensures there's significant time between operations. Plus, she has legitimate psychiatric credentials that lend credibility to her assessments of the victim's mental states. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Isabella had thought she was dealing with a cheating husband, but she had actually stumbled into a serial killing operation that had been running for years. There's something else, Agent Chen continued. We found evidence that Sophia has been selling information about the murders to a true crime podcast network. She's been profiting 3 times from each victim: the insurance money, the liquidated assets, and the media rights. Isabella felt bile rise in her throat. She's been turning our deaths into entertainment. The podcast is called Tragic Wives When Marriage Becomes Murder. It's been running for 2 years and has millions of subscribers. Sophia provides inside information about the cases while maintaining her anonymity as a law enforcement consultant. The financial hardship after betrayal suddenly made sense. The women weren't just being killed for insurance money. Their stories were being commodified, turned into content for people's commutes and workout routines. How did Richard get involved with her? Agent Chen pulled out another file. We're still piecing that together, but it looks like Sophia targeted him specifically. Morrison Tech was facing financial difficulties 18 months ago. Sophia applied for a position as his executive assistant with perfectly fabricated credentials and references. She created the whole identity. The real Sophia Chen was a 28-year-old marketing graduate who died in a car accident 3 years ago. Our suspect assumed her identity after losing her psychiatric license. It gave her a clean background and a plausible reason to be qualified for a high-level corporate position. Isabella realized she had never really known who Sophia was. The woman who had been sleeping with her husband, planning her murder, and commodifying her death was a complete stranger wearing a stolen identity. "What happens now?" Isabella asked. "Richard is being held without bail on charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, and insurance fraud. We're adding additional charges as we uncover more evidence. Sophia is fighting extradition from France. Apparently, she fled there immediately after your confrontation with Richard. Will they be convicted?" Agent Chen's smile was grim but confident. "Between your recordings, the financial evidence, the physical evidence from the vitamins, and the testimony we're getting from other victims who survived similar attempts, we have one of the strongest cases I've ever seen. Richard is looking at life in prison without parole." Isabella felt a wave of relief, but it was tempered by the realization of how many other women hadn't been as lucky or as prepared as she had been. What about the other victims, the ones who didn't survive? Their cases are being reopened. Families are finally getting answers about what really happened to their daughters, sisters, and mothers. In some ways, your survival has given justice to all of them. As Isabella left the FBI office, she felt a strange mixture of vindication and grief. She had survived, but at the cost of discovering that the man she had loved never existed and that her life had been part of a much larger and more sinister pattern. The therapy and self-discovery journey that lay ahead wouldn't just be about healing from Richard's betrayal. It would be about rebuilding her entire sense of reality and identity. But for the first time in years, Isabella felt like herself again. Not the perfect wife Richard had tried to create, not the victim Sophia had tried to destroy, but the strong, intelligent woman who had built companies and fought for her life. The pregnant wife betrayed story was becoming a story of survival and justice, and Isabella was determined to make sure it had a happy ending. 3 months later, Isabella sat in Dr. Elena Rodriguez's office, no longer as a victim seeking shelter, but as a woman beginning to reclaim her life. The baby, now born and healthy despite the trauma, slept peacefully in his carrier beside her chair. She had named him Gabriel, meaning God's strength, a reminder of the power that had seen them both through their darkest hour. "How are you feeling about the media attention?" Dr. Rodriguez asked. Isabella considered the question carefully. The story of the pregnant wife betrayed had indeed become a sensation, but not in the way Richard and Sophia had planned. Instead of being remembered as a tragic victim, Isabella had become a symbol of female empowerment and survival. "It's overwhelming sometimes," Isabella admitted. "But I think it's important that people understand what psychological abuse looks like. Too many women are living in situations like mine without recognizing the danger." The therapy and self-discovery journey had revealed layers of manipulation that Isabella was still processing. Richard hadn't just tried to kill her. He had spent years systematically destroying her sense of self-worth and independence. "You mentioned in our last session that you're considering writing a book about your experience." Isabella nodded. "Marcus thinks it could help other women, and the FBI said it might encourage more victims to come forward. Apparently, Sophia's operation was even larger than they initially thought. The investigation had uncovered a network of conspirators spanning multiple states and countries. Sophia had been recruiting men with financial problems and teaching them how to eliminate their wives for insurance money. The True Crime podcast had been just the tip of the iceberg. She had been running what amounted to a murder-for-hire service disguised as relationship counseling. "How do you feel about revisiting those memories for a book?" "Terrifying and necessary," Isabella replied honestly. "For 3 years, I lost myself completely. I became someone I didn't recognize. Weak, dependent, afraid of my own shadow. If sharing my story can help even one woman recognize those warning signs." Dr. Rodriguez smiled. "The woman sitting in front of me isn't weak. She never was. You survived a systematic campaign designed to destroy you, and you found a way to fight back. That takes incredible strength." Isabella looked down at Gabriel, who had inherited her dark hair and what she hoped would be her determination. I keep thinking about all the things Richard told me I couldn't do. He convinced me I was bad with money, that I was too emotional to make important decisions, that I needed him to function in the world. And now I'm managing my own finances, making my own choices, and raising my son as a single mother. Turns out I'm pretty capable when I'm not being psychologically undermined every day. The financial recovery had been easier than expected. Richard's assets were substantial, and with his conviction, Isabella had been awarded everything legitimately earned during their marriage. The insurance companies had also settled quickly once the evidence of fraud became clear, but the emotional recovery was more complex. Isabella was learning to trust her own judgment again, to believe in her own worth, to imagine a future that wasn't defined by Richard's manipulation. "Have you thought about dating, Dr.?" Rodriguez asked gently. Isabella blushed slightly. "Marcus and I have been spending a lot of time together, but I'm not ready for anything serious yet. I need to be sure I'm choosing someone for the right reasons. Not because I'm afraid to be alone." "That's very wise. What's different about how you feel with Marcus compared to how you felt with Richard?" "With Richard, I always felt like I was performing, trying to be the woman he wanted me to be. With Marcus, I can just be myself, the messy, complicated, sometimes difficult version of myself." Gabriel stirred in his carrier, making soft baby sounds that drew both women's attention. Isabella picked him up, marveling as she always did at his perfect tiny fingers and the way he seemed to study her face with serious dark eyes. "He's going to grow up knowing that his mother is a fighter, Doctor," Rodriguez observed. "I want him to know that his father was a sick man who made terrible choices. But that doesn't define him. I want him to understand that love should never involve fear or control." The conversation was interrupted by Isabella's phone buzzing with a text from Marcus. "Sophia extradited. Arraignment set for next month. Justice is coming." Isabella felt a familiar mixture of relief and anxiety. The legal proceedings weren't over, and she would have to testify again, relive the trauma in front of cameras and strangers. But each step forward brought her closer to true closure. "The hardest part," Isabella said, "is accepting that the man I fell in love with never really existed. Richard created a character designed to appeal to me specifically, the successful but vulnerable businessman who needed a strong woman to complete him. Every shared interest, every romantic gesture, every moment of apparent intimacy was calculated manipulation. How does that affect your ability to trust future relationships?" "I'm learning to trust myself first, to pay attention to my instincts instead of dismissing them, to value my own opinions and feelings instead of constantly seeking validation from someone else." "Doctor," Rodriguez made a note, "that's significant growth. Many abuse survivors struggle with self-trust for years. I think the difference is that I had 12 years of being a successful, independent woman before Richard. He didn't get to me until I was already formed. Some of his victims were much younger, more vulnerable. They didn't have the same foundation to rebuild from." Isabella had been corresponding with some of the other survivors, women who had escaped similar situations but with less evidence and less support. She was considering starting a foundation to help them rebuild their lives and navigate the legal system. "Speaking of rebuilding," Dr. Rodriguez said, "how do you feel about the house?" Isabella had been wrestling with what to do about the Malibu mansion. It held too many painful memories to live in, but it was also where she had found her strength and fought for her life. "I've decided to sell it and use the money for the foundation. That house was Richard's symbol of control over me. I want to turn it into something that helps other women break free." As the session concluded, Isabella felt the familiar sense of progress that had been marking her weeks. Each conversation, each decision, each moment of standing up for herself was another step away from the woman Richard had tried to create and back toward the woman she had always been. Gabriel had fallen asleep again, his tiny fist curled around Isabella's finger. She looked at him and made a silent promise he would grow up knowing that his mother was not a victim, but a survivor. Not a cautionary tale, but a story of triumph. The pregnant wife betrayed had become something much more powerful. A woman reborn through fire, ready to help others find their own strength. The midlife betrayal story was becoming a story of midlife renaissance. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and supporters as Isabella arrived for Richard's sentencing hearing. 6 months had passed since her escape from the wine cellar, and the media attention had never fully died down. The frozen trust case, as the press had dubbed it, had captured national attention as more details emerged about Sophia's murder-for-hire network. Isabella wore a navy blue suit that she had chosen carefully, professional, confident, but not flashy. She wanted to project strength without appearing vindictive. Gabriel was with her mother for the day. She hadn't wanted him in the courthouse for this final chapter. Marcus walked beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. Their relationship had developed slowly over the months, built on friendship and mutual respect, rather than the intense, overwhelming passion that had characterized her relationship with Richard. She was learning that real love felt different from the manipulation she had mistaken for romance. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked quietly as they climbed the courthouse steps. "I've been ready for months," Isabella replied. "It's time to close this chapter." Inside the courtroom, Isabella saw Richard for the first time since that night in the wine cellar. The months in prison had changed him. He looked older, thinner, his perfectly groomed appearance replaced by the standard orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. But his eyes still held the cold calculation she now recognized as his true nature. Sophia sat at a separate defense table, having been tried separately for her role in the broader conspiracy. She had been convicted on multiple counts of murder, fraud, and racketeering, and was facing life in prison without parole. Today was Richard's turn to face justice. Judge Patricia Martinez called the court to order, and Isabella took her seat in the front row with the other victims' families. The families of Catherine and Sarah Morrison were there, finally getting answers about their daughters' deaths. Representatives from the families of Sophia's other victims had also come, turning the hearing into a gathering of survivors seeking closure. "The court will now hear victim impact statements," Judge Martinez announced. Isabella had agonized over what to say. She wanted to be eloquent but not dramatic, honest but not bitter. Most importantly, she wanted to help the judge understand the full scope of Richard's crimes. When her name was called, Isabella walked to the podium with steady steps. She looked directly at Richard as she began to speak. "Your Honor, when I married Richard Morrison 6 years ago, I thought I was marrying the love of my life. What I actually married was a carefully constructed lie designed to exploit my trust and ultimately destroy me." Richard's lawyer had advised him not to react, but Isabella could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched even in handcuffs. "The man sitting at that table spent years systematically undermining my sense of self-worth, isolating me from my support network, and creating a narrative that would justify my murder. He didn't just try to kill my body, he tried to kill my spirit, my identity, my very sense of reality." Isabella's voice remained steady as she continued. "But what makes his crimes even more heinous is that he wasn't acting alone. Along with Sophia Chen, he was part of a network that targeted vulnerable women, murdered them for money, and then profited again by turning their deaths into entertainment." She could see some of the jury members from Richard's trial in the gallery, many of them wiping away tears. The evidence had been overwhelming, but hearing it from Isabella's perspective made it personal. "I stand here today not as a victim, but as a survivor. I survived because I remembered who I was before Richard Morrison tried to remake me in his image. I survived because I refused to let him reduce me to the weak, dependent woman he needed me to be for his plan to work." Isabella paused, looking around the courtroom at the families of other victims. But 12 other women didn't survive. They died believing they were unloved, unstable, worthless. They died never knowing that their husband's rejection wasn't a reflection of their value, but a calculated step in a murder plot. Now she looked directly at Richard again. "You stole their lives, their futures, their children's mothers. You turned their love into a weapon against them. There is no punishment severe enough for what you've done, but I hope that spending the rest of your life in prison will give you time to understand the magnitude of your crimes." As Isabella returned to her seat, She felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had said everything she needed to say, had given voice not just to her own experience, but to the experiences of women who could no longer speak for themselves. Richard's lawyer made a brief statement asking for mercy, claiming that Richard had been manipulated by Sophia and wasn't the mastermind of the operation. But the evidence told a different story. Richard had been a willing and enthusiastic participant who had helped Sophia refine her methods. When it came time for Richard to speak, he stood slowly and faced the judge. Isabella had wondered if he would show remorse, if facing life in prison might crack the narcissistic facade he had maintained throughout the trial. "Your Honor," Richard began, his voice steady and controlled, "I want to acknowledge the pain my actions have caused. I lost my way, made terrible decisions, and hurt people I cared about." It was a carefully worded statement that acknowledged wrongdoing without accepting full responsibility. Even now, facing life in prison, Richard was trying to manipulate the narrative. "I ask for the court's mercy, not for myself, but for my son. Gabriel deserves to have the possibility of knowing his father someday." Isabella felt a surge of anger. Even in his supposed apology, Richard was trying to use Gabriel as leverage, to create a narrative where he was the wronged father, rather than the man who had tried to murder his child before birth. Judge Martinez looked unimpressed. "Mr. Morrison, you have been convicted of attempted murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and racketeering. The evidence showed a pattern of calculated cruelty that spanned multiple years and multiple victims." She paused, looking directly at Richard. "You systematically destroyed your wife's sense of self-worth, planned her murder in elaborate detail, and showed no remorse even when caught. Your crimes weren't crimes of passion or desperation. They were business decisions made by a man who saw human lives as obstacles to profit. Therefore, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole on the attempted murder charge, to be served consecutively with additional sentences for the conspiracy and fraud charges. You will never again have the opportunity to harm another woman." The courtroom erupted in applause and tears. Isabella felt Marcus squeeze her hand, and she realized she was crying, not from sadness, but from relief. It was finally over. As Richard was led away, he turned to look at Isabella one last time. She met his gaze steadily, no longer the frightened woman he had tried to break. She was Isabella Morrison, survivor, mother, an advocate for women who had faced similar terrors. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements, but Isabella had only a few words to share. "Justice has been served today, not just for me, but for all the women who didn't survive to see their killers brought to trial. Richard Morrison will never hurt another woman, and that's what matters most." As she walked away from the courthouse with Marcus, Isabella felt truly free for the first time in years. The legal proceedings were over, the truth had been told, and Richard would spend the rest of his life paying for his crimes. The pregnant wife betrayed story had reached its conclusion with justice served and truth revealed. Now Isabella could focus on the future, raising Gabriel, helping other survivors, and building a life based on her own choices rather than someone else's manipulation. The heartbreaking family drama had become a story of triumph over evil, proof that even the most carefully laid plans couldn't destroy a woman who refused to surrender her truth. 1 year after Richard's sentencing, Isabella stood in the conference room of the Morrison Foundation for Domestic Violence Survivors, looking out at the faces of women who had traveled from across the country to attend their first annual summit. The foundation, built with the assets recovered from Richard's fraud and supported by the book deal for Isabella's memoir, had grown beyond her wildest expectations. "Ladies," Isabella began, addressing the group of survivors, advocates, and professionals. "When I was locked in that wine cellar, believing I was going to die, I made a promise to my unborn son. I promised that if we survived, I would make sure our story had meaning, that our pain would somehow help others." The room was silent, all attention focused on Isabella as she spoke. Gabriel, now a healthy 1-year-old, played quietly in a corner with a babysitter, occasionally looking up at his mother with the bright, curious eyes that reminded Isabella daily of the future they had almost lost. Today, I can say that promise has been kept. In the past year, this foundation has helped over 200 women escape dangerous situations, provided legal support for 53 domestic violence prosecutions, and funded research that has changed how law enforcement approaches cases of psychological abuse. The applause was warm and sustained. Isabella had learned to accept praise gracefully, understanding that her story could inspire others even when the attention still felt overwhelming. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, now the Foundation's chief psychological consultant, stepped forward to introduce the day's keynote speaker. Our next presenter is someone many of you know from the news coverage of the Morrison case. Agent Sarah Chen led the FBI investigation that uncovered one of the largest domestic violence conspiracies in recent history. Agent Chen took the podium with the same confidence Isabella remembered from their first meeting. Thanks to Isabella's courage in coming forward and the evidence she gathered, we've been able to connect Sophia's network to over 30 suspicious deaths spanning 7 years in multiple countries. The scope of the conspiracy still took Isabella's breath away. What had started as a personal betrayal had revealed a systematic operation that had destroyed dozens of families. But the most important outcome, Agent Chen continued, has been the changes in how law enforcement approaches these cases. The Morrison Foundation has developed protocols that help officers recognize patterns of long-term psychological manipulation and has trained prosecutors in 17 states on how to build cases around financial coercion. Isabella felt a surge of pride. The female empowerment that had driven her survival was now helping protect other women before they found themselves in life-threatening situations. After the formal presentations, Isabella mingled with the attendees, hearing stories that ranged from heartbreaking to inspiring. A young woman from Texas told her how Isabella's book had helped her recognize her boyfriend's controlling behavior before it escalated. An older woman from Florida shared how the Foundation's legal support had helped her win custody of her grandchildren after her daughter's suspicious death. Mrs. Morrison, a soft voice interrupted Isabella's conversation with a group of advocates. Isabella turned to see a teenager, maybe 17 or 18, with nervous eyes and an uncertain smile. I'm Emily Patterson. My mom she was one of Sophia's victims, Jennifer Patterson from Phoenix. Isabella's heart clenched. She remembered Jennifer's case from the FBI files, a 34-year-old mother of 2 who had died in an apparent hiking accident that was actually staged murder. Emily, Isabella said gently, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your mother was a beautiful woman. I wanted to thank you, Emily continued, her voice growing stronger. Before your case broke everything open, the police said Mom's death was an accident. They said she was careless, that she shouldn't have been hiking alone. We knew something was wrong, but no one would listen to us. Isabella could see the pain in Emily's eyes, but also something else, determination. Now we have answers. Now we know Mom didn't die because she was stupid or reckless. She died because evil people targeted her. And because of what you did, they're never going to hurt anyone else. Isabella found herself crying as she hugged this brave young woman who had lost her mother to the same monster that had tried to destroy her own family. Your mother would be so proud of you for being here today, Isabella whispered. I'm starting college next year, Emily said. Criminal justice major. I want to do what you're doing. Help other families get justice. As the day wound down, Isabella found herself alone in the conference room with Marcus, who had become both her partner in life and her closest collaborator in the Foundation's work. Tired, he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Good tired, Isabella replied, leaning back against his chest. It's amazing how much energy you can find when you're doing work that matters. Gabriel had fallen asleep in his stroller, exhausted from a day of being admired by dozens of women who saw him as a symbol of hope. Isabella watched his peaceful face and marveled at how different their lives were from what Richard had planned. I got a call from the publisher today, Marcus said. The book is being translated into 12 languages, and they want to discuss a follow-up about the Foundation's work. Isabella's memoir, Frozen Trust: A Survivor's Guide to Recognizing and Escaping Psychological Abuse, had become a bestseller and was being used in domestic violence education programs across the country. The moral lessons on resilience that she had learned through her ordeal were helping other women recognize their own strength. "What do you think?" Marcus asked. "I think there are still too many women who don't know they're in danger," Isabella replied. "If another book can reach even one person who needs help." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching Gabriel sleep and contemplating the journey that had brought them to this moment. The therapy and self-discovery that had begun in those first desperate weeks after her escape had evolved into a mission that gave meaning to the trauma. Isabella's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Rodriguez. "Saw the news coverage of today's summit. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become." Isabella's mother had passed away 8 months earlier, but not before seeing her daughter rebuild her life and create something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. In her final weeks, she had told Isabella that watching her fight back had been the proudest moment of her life. "Ready to go home?" Marcus asked. Isabella looked around the conference room one more time, at the photos on the walls showing women who had been helped by the foundation, at the awards and recognition that represented lives saved and justice served. "Yes," she said, gathering her things and moving toward Gabriel's stroller. "I'm ready." But as they prepared to leave, Isabella's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Hello, Mrs. Morrison. This is Detective Lisa Warren from the Seattle Police Department. We have a situation up here that matches the pattern from your case. A wealthy businessman, a missing wife, and some very suspicious circumstances. We could really use your help." Isabella looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. The work was never really finished. There would always be another Richard, another Sophia, another woman who needed someone to believe her story and fight for her life. "Detective Warren," Isabella said, "tell me everything." The pregnant wife betrayed had become a voice for the voiceless, a defender of the vulnerable, a woman who had transformed her own survival into a mission of justice. As they walked out of the foundation offices into the warm California evening, Isabella felt Gabriel stir in his stroller. He opened his dark eyes and looked up at her with a serious expression, as if he understood the importance of the work they were doing. "What do you think, baby boy?" Isabella whispered, ready to help another family find their way home. Gabriel smiled, his first real smile that wasn't just gas or reflexes, and Isabella took it as a yes. The heartbreaking family drama had become a story of healing, hope, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and child who had survived the worst and chosen to use their experience to protect others. The midlife betrayal story had become a midlife mission story, proving that sometimes the most beautiful flowers grow from the darkest soil. 5 years after that terrifying night in the wine cellar, Isabella Morrison walked across the stage at UCLA to receive an honorary doctorate in criminology. Gabriel, now a bright and inquisitive 6-year-old, watched from the audience with Marcus, who had become his adoptive father in all the ways that mattered. Dr. Morrison's work in developing new protocols for identifying and prosecuting cases of psychological domestic abuse has fundamentally changed how our justice system protects vulnerable individuals, the dean announced as Isabella accepted her hood. Her foundation has directly saved over 3,000 lives and influenced legislation in all 50 states. Isabella looked out at the audience and saw faces that told the story of her journey. Dr. Elena Rodriguez beamed with pride from the front row. Agent Sarah Chen had flown in from Washington, where she now headed the FBI's Domestic Violence Task Force. Emily Patterson, now a senior at the police academy, gave her a thumbs up from the student section. But the most meaningful presence was that of the Morrison Foundation survivors, women who had escaped situations similar to Isabella's and were now advocates, counselors, and leaders in their own right. They represented the real legacy of that horrible year when Isabella had discovered that her perfect life was built on lies. After the ceremony, Isabella found herself in the quiet of the university chapel, taking a moment to process the magnitude of how far she had come. Gabriel ran between the pews, his laughter echoing off the stone walls. while Marcus sat beside her in comfortable silence. "Mama," Gabriel said, climbing into her lap with the easy affection of a child who had never known fear in his own home. "Why do people give you prizes?" Isabella considered how to explain her work in terms a 6-year-old could understand. "Because sometimes people hurt other people, and I help the police catch the bad guys and help the hurt people feel better. Like when Daddy Richard was mean to you." Isabella's heart clenched. They had been honest with Gabriel about his biological father in age-appropriate ways, explaining that Richard had been sick in his mind and had made very bad choices. It was important that Gabriel understand his history without carrying shame for crimes he had no part in. "Yes, sweetheart, like that. But you were stronger than him," Gabriel said with the absolute confidence of a child who saw his mother as invincible. "I became stronger than him," Isabella corrected gently. "For a while, I forgot how strong I was. But when you were in my belly and we were both in danger, I remembered." Marcus squeezed Isabella's free hand. "And now you help other moms remember how strong they are too." The simple truth of it still amazed Isabella sometimes. The pregnant wife betrayed had become a nationally recognized expert on domestic abuse, a best-selling author, and the founder of one of the most effective victim advocacy organizations in the country. But more than that, she had become herself again, the confident, capable woman who had built companies and solved problems, who trusted her own judgment and refused to be diminished by anyone else's need for control. "Mrs. I mean, Dr. Morrison." A young woman approached hesitantly, holding a copy of Isabella's latest book. Isabella smiled and stood to greet her. Over the years, she had learned to recognize the particular nervousness of someone gathering courage to share their story. "Please, call me Isabella. What's your name?" "Amanda. Amanda Chen. I know that's confusing because of, the other Sophia Chen, but I'm not related to her at all." Isabella had heard this clarification many times over the years. The name Chen was common enough that several completely innocent women had felt the need to distance themselves from the convicted serial killer. "Of course not. Amanda, how can I help you? I think my sister might be in trouble. Her husband is really controlling, and she's been pulling away from the family. Some of the things you wrote about in your book, they sound familiar." Isabella felt the familiar surge of protective instinct that had driven her work for the past 5 years. "Tell me more." As Amanda shared her concerns, Isabella found herself mentally cataloging warning signs and intervention strategies. This was what her life looked like now: constant vigilance for women who might be trapped in situations they couldn't see clearly from the inside. After giving Amanda contact information for local resources and her own direct line, Isabella returned to Marcus and Gabriel, who had found a book about architecture and were discussing the differences between various styles of columns. "Another one?" Marcus asked quietly. "Her sister, classic isolation patterns, financial control, emotional manipulation disguised as protection." Marcus nodded grimly. After 5 years of this work, he had become almost as skilled as Isabella at recognizing the signs of abuse. "Will you take the case personally? If Amanda's sister wants help, yes. We've learned that direct intervention from survivors often breaks through the denial faster than traditional counseling." It was true. Isabella had discovered that women trapped in abusive relationships often dismissed advice from professionals who had never lived through similar experiences. But when a survivor shared her story, when she could say, "I know exactly what you're going through because I've been there," it created a connection that could save lives. As they walked across campus toward the car, Isabella reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken. At 41, she was happier and more fulfilled than she had ever been, even in the early days with Richard before his true nature revealed itself. The financial hardship after betrayal that she had feared never materialized. Richard's legitimate assets had been substantial, and the life insurance policy he had planned to claim after her death had instead provided the foundation for her new life. More importantly, Isabella had discovered that she was perfectly capable of managing her own finances, making her own decisions, and building her own success. "Mama," Gabriel said as they buckled him into his car seat, "can we stop for ice cream?" "What do you think, Marcus?" Isabella asked. "Should we celebrate?" "I think Dr. Morrison deserves all the ice cream she wants," Marcus replied with a grin. As they drove through Los Angeles toward their favorite family ice cream shop, Isabella's phone rang with a call from Dr. Rodriguez. "I saw the ceremony coverage on the news," Dr. Rodriguez said. "How does it feel to be Dr. Morrison?" "Surreal," Isabella admitted. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life." "You've earned every bit of recognition you've received, but more importantly, you've created a legacy that will protect women long after we're all gone." It was true. The Morrison Foundation had influenced legislation requiring training for law enforcement on psychological abuse patterns. Isabella's protocols were being used in police departments across the country. Her books were required reading in social work and criminal justice programs. But the real legacy, Isabella knew, was in the individual lives that had been saved. Women who had recognized warning signs because of her story, who had found the courage to leave because they knew they weren't alone, who had survived because someone finally believed them. "There's something else I wanted to tell you," Dr. Rodriguez continued. "I got a call today from a researcher at Harvard. They want to study the Morrison Foundation model for potential expansion internationally. Apparently, the problem of organized domestic abuse networks is more widespread than anyone realized." Isabella felt a familiar mixture of pride and exhaustion. The work was never finished, the need never fully met, but she had learned to find satisfaction in the progress rather than despair at the enormity of the problem. "Send me the details," Isabella said. "If we can help women in other countries avoid what I went through, it's worth exploring." As they arrived at the ice cream shop, Gabriel was already chattering about which flavor he wanted, his excitement infectious. Isabella watched him bounce with anticipation and marveled at his resilience. Despite the traumatic beginning to his life, despite the truth about his biological father, Gabriel was growing up confident and secure, surrounded by love and honesty. "You know what the best part of today was?" Marcus said as they found a table with their ice cream. "What? Watching Gabriel watch you receive that doctorate, seeing how proud he is of his mom." Isabella looked at her son, who was methodically eating his way through a bowl of chocolate chip ice cream, and felt her heart swell with love and determination. Gabriel would grow up knowing that his mother was strong, that she had faced terrible danger and emerged victorious, that she had used her survival to help others. The heartbreaking family drama that had nearly destroyed them both had become a story of triumph and transformation. The pregnant wife betrayed had become a force for justice and change. But more than any of that, Isabella had become the woman she was always meant to be. Not the perfect wife Richard had tried to create, not the broken victim Sophia had planned to profit from, but the authentic, powerful, compassionate human being who had always existed beneath the layers of manipulation and control. As they finished their ice cream and prepared to head home, Isabella felt Gabriel slip his small hand into hers. "I love you, Mama," he said simply. "I love you too, sweetheart. More than all the stars in the sky." "Even more than ice cream," Isabella laughed, the sound carrying across the warm evening air. "Even more than ice cream." The midlife betrayal story had become a story of midlife triumph, proof that even the most carefully planned evil could not destroy a woman who refused to surrender her truth. And in the end, that truth had set not just Isabella free, but thousands of other women who had found their own strength through her example. The legacy of the Morrison Foundation would continue long after Isabella was gone, but her most important legacy was sitting beside her, eating ice cream and planning his next adventure. A child who would grow up knowing that love should never involve fear, that strength comes from truth, and that sometimes the most beautiful flowers really do grow from the darkest soil. Epilogue. 10 years later, Isabella stood at the podium of the United Nations headquarters in New York, looking out at delegates from around the world who had gathered for the International Conference on Domestic Violence Prevention. At 46, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who had faced her worst fears and emerged victorious. 10 years ago, she began, I was a pregnant woman locked in a wine cellar, believing I was about to die. Today, I stand before you as living proof that survival is possible, that justice can be achieved, and that one woman's story can change the world. Gabriel, now 16, watched from the gallery with Marcus. He had grown into a thoughtful teenager who volunteered at the foundation and planned to study international law. The scared pregnant woman who had fought for both their lives could never have imagined the confident young man her son had become. The Morrison Protocol, now implemented in 43 countries, has identified and prevented over 15,000 cases of domestic violence. Isabella continued, but numbers don't tell the whole story. Behind each prevented case is a woman who will live to see her children grow up, a family that will remain intact, a community that will be safer. The statistics were staggering, but Isabella never lost sight of the individual stories. Just last week, she had received a letter from a woman in Brazil who had recognized the warning signs of financial abuse because of a translated version of Isabella's book. The woman had escaped before her husband's plan could fully develop. The case that started this work, my case, revealed that domestic violence is not always a crime of passion. Sometimes it is a calculated business decision made by people who see human lives as obstacles to profit. We must remain vigilant against these organized networks while also supporting individual survivors. In the audience, Isabella could see faces that represented the global expansion of her work. Dr. Rodriguez, now in her 60s, had become an internationally recognized expert on trauma recovery. Agent Chen had helped establish similar task forces in 12 countries. Emily Patterson, now Detective Patterson, ran training programs for law enforcement across North America. But the most meaningful faces belonged to the survivors, women who had escaped situations similar to Isabella's and were now advocates in their own right. They represented every continent, every economic background, every race and religion. Domestic abuse knew no boundaries, but neither did the strength to overcome it. After her speech, Isabella found herself in a quiet corner of the UN building, taking a moment to process the magnitude of the day. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Dr. Morrison, you don't know me, but my daughter is in trouble. I think her husband is planning to hurt her. Can you help us? Isabella smiled despite the gravity of the message. After 10 years, the requests for help had never stopped coming, and she had never stopped responding. Each cry for help was another chance to prevent the tragedy that had almost befallen her own family. Always, she typed back, already mentally composing a list of resources and next steps. As she rejoined Marcus and Gabriel for the reception, Isabella reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The pregnant wife betrayed had become an internationally recognized advocate for justice. The heartbreaking family drama had become a story of hope and transformation that inspired people around the world. But perhaps most importantly, Isabella had learned that survival was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. The real triumph wasn't in escaping Richard's trap, but in using that escape to build something beautiful. Something that would protect other women long after Isabella's own story was finished. Ready to go home? Marcus asked, wrapping his arm around her waist. Isabella looked around the United Nations building one more time, at the delegates and advocates and survivors who were carrying the work forward, and felt a deep sense of completion. Yeah, she said, taking Gabriel's hand and walking toward their future. I'm ready to go home. The Morrison Foundation would continue its work. The protocols would save more lives, and the story of one woman's refusal to surrender would echo through generations of survivors yet to come. But for tonight, Isabella Morrison, survivor, advocate, mother, and living proof that love should never involve fear, was simply going home with her family, grateful for every day she had been given and determined to use each one to make the world a little bit safer for women everywhere. The pregnant wife betrayed story had become, ultimately, a story about the unbreakable power of the human spirit and the extraordinary things that could grow from the ashes of betrayal.